Greetings, everybody. Warm welcome. It's an honor to have you here at the Saphira Center of Shamanism, where we break down the ancient esoteric practices of shamanism and the occult, bringing them into balance with the deep psyche. My name is Luke, experienced practitioner and mentor of the shamanic and occult sciences. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining me once again. Do not forget to check out Patreon. There's lots of very powerful and exciting things up and coming this month and over the next few months. Powerful webinars, initiatory rituals, posts that include powerful alchemical operations, invocations, and many other things. All of that alongside the hundreds of pieces of exclusive content that is already live on this Patreon. Access starts at just £20 per month. And as you go higher on the tiers, you can grant access to me on a more direct level. You can also grant access to webinars, initiatory rituals, and many more things. I look forward to seeing you there. Or if you want to book me for a mentorship, second link in the description to book me directly. I look forward to seeing you there also. So today we are going to be discussing the concept of vampirism. The vampire archetype from the perspective of integration and trauma work. Okay, vampire in the context of occultism simply means to carry energy from one source to another, to train the system to be able to metabolize energy in a way that fuels an aspect of yourself. Now, vampirism is covered in aesthetics within the occult community. It's easy to approach it in a way that gets stuck in the theatrics of it. It is very alluring, it is very edgy, but there is generally a big misunderstanding as to what vampirism really is from an evolutionary point of view, and what it really means to integrate the vampire within you. There are two types of vampires, understanding that there are also going to be subcategories of vampires, which I will go through in due course, but generally speaking, there are two types of vampires that you will encounter in the world around you. You have unconscious vampires and conscious vampires. It really is that simple. The majority of the collective are unconscious vampires, and the reason for this is because they are not aware of their hunger for unhelpful validation that maintains their constructs, personas, and falsehood. Unconscious vampires siphon validation and energy without consciously realizing they're doing it in order to reinforce their protective mechanisms. They do so to reinforce their falsehood, to reinforce their ego, and to actually fall into deeper fragmentation. And a lot of the time, these people frame this as genuine evolution or integration. They use the validation of the world around them. They might go to a practitioner, a healer, a therapist, whatever that may be, and they would feed off of the validation in which that source is giving them and actually use it to fragment themselves more and reinforce their narcissistic bubble. And many therapists and practitioners, and realistically everyone around you, by default, unless they are consciously aware of this concept, will validate the falsehood. They will validate separation, and they will validate the illusionary mental constructs that have been built in order to keep somebody separated from their repressed trauma and from their vulnerability. So unconscious vampires unconsciously siphon energy from the external world to maintain their illusions, to maintain their self-deceptions, and use it as a reason to maintain their narcissistic bubble and use it as validation to maintain that bubble. It is immensely common and extremely hard on the body, and the majority of the world does embody the concept of the unconscious vampire. The conscious vampire, on the other hand, switches this around completely. They willingly engage in dark matter and vampiric alchemy. And what this results in is the continuous confrontation with death and mortality, and actually the rupturing of the personas and falsehood that an unconscious vampire would do everything in their power to try and maintain. What this does is that it builds a person's aptitude for chaos and rupture, and it trains the system to actually consume chaos. Now, what consuming chaos really means from a psychological perspective is building a relationship with the darker aspects of the psyche, with the unconscious mind, with the concept of dark matter energy, so that the system can learn how to metabolize it and process it in a sustainable way. Whereas the majority of people would very much avoid, even the people who are into the darker occult stuff also avoid their internal darkness, and therefore they become susceptible to its negative influence on them and the world around them. So what real vampiric alchemy is about is basically flooding the system with unconscious energies, with unconscious material, provoking deeper repressed traumas, particularly around the things that are symbolic of the vampire, such as the need to consume, what's fueling your desire, what makes you hungry, where your energy is going, and the concept of death itself. So a conscious vampire makes the decision to actually merge with dark matter energy in a very deep and intimate way. And in doing so, they are building a relationship with the repressed aspects of their unconscious mind on the psychological level. The effect is a little bit like injecting oneself with a virus. Initially, it's going to feel uncomfortable and it may trigger some symptoms, it may trigger repressed emotions coming to the surface and things like that. But as the system adjusts to that energy consciously, the system starts actually learning to process it not as foreign energies, but as its own energy. So that means that the system becomes adept at actually absorbing energy from the world around it and actually metabolizing it effectively. And the energy that does not get metabolized just moves through excess, okay? I've had it before where energy has been flooded into my system and it hasn't actually stayed in my system. I've just got like a load of diarrhea for a few days or things like that, you know? Too much information there. So the concept of conscious vampirism is flooding the system consciously with dark matter energy and learning how to actually process it and metabolize it in the world around the individual. What comes with this is an intensive path of death and rebirth. It requires one to die to their old self time and time again, and it also requires one to actually build a conscious relationship with desire, hunger, and all things that are actually fueling their need to have certain things in their lives. What this does is that it creates deeper levels of mastery, but also deeper levels of discernment and as to where the person's energy actually goes. Vampiric alchemy has a paradoxical effect on the energy field. Okay, you're pulling dark matter energy in and choosing to go into yourself consciously. And in doing so, that is going to have greater resonance and radiance when it comes to the world around you. So in other words, the deeper somebody is willing to fall into themselves and look at themselves, the more they are going to radiate throughout the world around them. And this will naturally have a rupturous effect on the psyches and the protective parts of those around the individual. Now, to really summarize that, unconscious vampirism is fueling falsehood unconsciously. Conscious vampirism is actually devouring falsehood and actually using it to grow stronger, more resilient, more confident, and ultimately using it to fuel their deeper levels of evolution and connection to truth and authenticity. What I'm also going to be speaking about today is the concept of the Ascended Vampires, okay? Beings that sort of fall in a sort of grey area between Undead and Ascended Masters, okay? I do see this as a type of necromancy. The Ascended Vampires are literal spirits and archetypal energies that can help the practitioner to master different aspects of the vampire archetype. So this is exactly what we are going to be discussing today. We're going to be discussing the vampire archetype in depth, what is required to really embody it properly, and I'm also going to be explaining how you can work with the Ascended Vampires to help you to master the Vampiric archetype within you. Absolutely essential topic, so definitely stay tuned. So let's start by explaining what vampirism is not about. Vampirism is not about siphoning other people's energy. It is about mastering hunger, containment, and desire, as well as facing death and mortality consciously instead of avoiding it. Many people in the occult community get stuck in the aesthetics of vampirism because it is a cool concept, and the idea of being an energy vampire consciously is very appealing to a lot of people. It is, for me, it was definitely for me. I was very interested in the concept of vampirism, but there was something about it that never really sat right with me in terms of taking energy from other people, even if it is benefiting the other person in the process. So there are types of conscious vampirism whereby somebody does willingly extend a tendril from themselves into somebody else and drain their energy, because what is actually being drained is energy that the person does not need. Okay, so there are sort of questions around the concept of morality, and there's different levels of vampirism here, of course, but even the concept for me of draining somebody's vitality, even if it's benefiting them in the process, there's something about that that doesn't sit right with me either. And the reason for that is because if vampirism is about mastering desire and becoming self-sustaining, why do you need to sustain yourself from other people, is a big question. It is valid to say that when somebody goes through a lot of dark matter alchemy and a lot of vampiric alchemy within themselves, they are emanating an energy that resonates with somebody's unconscious mind. So naturally, those who they come into contact with, if they are open to it, and if it is for their soul's evolutionary best interest to do so, they are going to be affected by the energy in which the person is emanating. But this does not happen in a way of you literally draining their falsehood. What's happening is a type of energy exchange, okay? You are somewhat getting an energy from them, and they are also getting an energy from you. It's important to remember that all vampirism needs to have a two-way feed. So in order for any vampirism to be effective, it has to hold evolutionary potential for the person that is actually being drained. For example, somebody who gets drained unconsciously, say for example, you could refer to somebody who emanates quite narcissistic qualities, who, controls people, drains people that way, as an example. It is not just them that is feeding off of that, but the victim is also feeding off of them as well in a way that is not helpful. That is a form of a two-way feed that happens through unconscious vampirism. Whereas with conscious vampirism, it can, and in fact it must, benefit the person in order for the feed to be able to take place. In other words, if you are consciously draining somebody else, then it means that they are going to be benefiting from it one way or another. And many people who call themselves conscious vampires or psychic vampires do engage in a type of vampirism that does, on the surface, benefit the person. But the question goes, does one need to actually drain somebody else and sustain themselves if vampirism is about mastering the vampire? This comes through the concept of paradoxical initiation. Okay, when you're interacting with a vampire consciously, whether it's in the spirit world or with a literal person, what's basically happening is a paradoxical lesson. Okay, and what's happening here is that you basically enter a process whereby you have a choice as to how you process the lesson. It's the same for if you interact with a demon or any other spirit, but particularly dark matter spirits, they operate paradoxically. This means that you are supposed to actually learn from that encounter and integrate what that spirit represents, instead of actually becoming more like that spirit. So this means that if we use vampires as an example, or the interaction particularly with the concept of the Ascended Vampires, which I'll get into in due course, interacting with those types of intelligences is very much for mastering the qualities of the vampire, not to actually fall into what they represent. Okay, and this is debatable and dependent on what somebody or how somebody wants to use these types of energies. But in my view, from a real trauma-informed perspective, vampirism comes through the genuine mastery of the vampire archetype. What does it mean to master the vampire archetype? Mastering the vampire archetype requires a constant process of death, comparable to the concept of shamanic death, whereby you are willingly letting go of who you once were to embody the unknown of who you may or may not become. In other words, a severing of singular identity is required. This is exactly why vampirism and the concept of becoming a vampire is often linked to the concept of crossing the Cliffothic abyss. Crossing the Cliffothic abyss, you are going through a type of vampiric alchemy whereby you are having your singular identity severed and your consciousness then becomes more fluid if the initiatory process is surrendered to. This is seen to have numerous energetic benefits on the practitioner on numerous levels, in terms of not being attached to a singular identity, but also learning how to sustain themselves in an effective way. In death, you find mastery. In death, you find who you were always meant to be. But who you were always meant to be is also an impermanent concept, which also needs to die and become something else. So embodying the vampire archetype is constantly dying to the old self and actually mastering what is underneath. Okay, so when you're dying to your old self, you are no longer reliant on a singular identity, and you are no longer going to be basically doing everything in your power to maintain this identity. Instead, you are going to actually be seeking genuine sovereignty from the world around you. The need to siphon somebody else's energy does not come from sovereignty, it comes from lack. So mastering the vampire archetype means facing death consciously, so that you are not reliant on a singular identity. What this allows you to do is redistribute your energy into something which you're actually choosing. Whereas by default, we are all wired to maintain who we think that we are, and everything we do becomes an attempt to feed that identity, the energy of the unconscious vampire, in other words. So becoming the conscious vampire is willingly letting that identity die, and letting yourself become what you could call a different type of organism entirely. Now, what's changing is simply how you distribute energy and how you take energy from the world. In other words, you are not going to need to maintain your illusionary personas anymore, but instead you are going to willingly let go of them and distribute energy into something that you are actually consciously choosing. What comes with this is also the mastery of containment. And what containment means is the ability to hold your energy without distributing it into illusionary constructs to try and reconstruct an illusionary sense of self. Learning how to contain your energy and hold it for your own best interest. What also comes with it, with that containment, is discernment. So what you plug energy into after vampiric transformation or continuous vampiric transformation is for your evolutionary best interest. So something that is actually fueling deeper levels of vulnerability and openness within you. What also comes with it is the mastery of hunger. Now, this is the core aspect of vampiric alchemy and what is required to master the vampire within you. What drives you in life? What drives your actions? Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you go to work? Okay, what is actually driving you? For the majority of people, by default, the hunger is coming from a place of lack. So they get up and go to work for no other reason than they need to have the money to pay the bills. Not saying that there's not evolution in that, but that is where hunger is coming from a place of falsehood. It's not coming from a place of genuine passion. So somebody may get up in the morning to go to work, and then they may go to work to then get home later in the evening, and they get home later in the evening to eat food, put on the TV, and stuff like that. In other words, their hunger is constantly for something else other than where they are. So what comes with the mastery of hunger is understanding what is driving you and understanding if those things that are driving you are coming from genuine authenticity or obligation. For the majority of people, it will be coming from obligation because we're taught that we need to strive for all of these things, and everything we do is an attempt to get to somewhere else. So if somebody feels called to, say, engage in occult work or engage in spirituality, often this also comes from a place of obligation-based hunger. They're hungry for the maintenance of something that they didn't actually choose. They're hungry for the maintenance of falsehoods. They're hungry for the maintenance of their masks. They're not actually hungry for genuine evolution. I used to spend a lot of time training people in shamanism. I still do, but on a different basis. Okay, it's less about training in shamanism, more about actually embodying the shamanic technologies for their own self-development. What I found is that a lot of the people who wanted to train in shamanism did not actually give a flying shit about their evolution. Okay, they just want to have the healing tools to become the shaman. They want to be able to do extraction work. They want to be able to do banishings. They want to be able to do all of these things that they can use to fuel their identity. Okay, at which point that is a form of unbalanced and obligation-based hunger because they're trying to then maintain something that they did not consciously choose. They're maintaining this identity in order to feel enough within the world around them. What comes with vampiric alchemy is the redistribution of desire. And this is what allows you to become hungry for things that actually sustain your evolution. Whereas most people, by default, are hungry for things that actually stagnate their evolution. Okay, I've got to do this to hold on to this, got to do that to hold on to that, I've got to do this to cope, I've got to do that to cope. It's all unconscious hunger, and it's not actually sustaining. This is why the majority of the world are so severely unhappy. Okay, so severely unhappy at the moment at the beginning of 2026. People think, oh yeah, 2025 was quite a challenging year, so 2026 and the years following are going to be even better. Yeah, yes, they'll be better, but they're going to be more challenging, okay, because of this concept of hunger. People are hungry for things that don't actually serve the evolution of their soul. They are hungry for suppression and the maintenance of who they think they need to be. This is not what vampirism is about. Vampirism is about removing the reliance on falsehood and learning how to eat it. Learning how to devour that falsehood within yourself so that you can become something far greater and far less restricted than something that you have been given. So the mastery of desire and hunger comes from the true understanding and self-reflection of what is sustaining you. What is actually driving your hunger? What's actually driving your motivation? Now, where vampiric alchemy can get quite dangerous is in the nihilistic effects that it can create. So those who go into the darker aspects of occult initiation, for example, often do not know how to feed effectively. This is why vampirism, conscious vampirism, and the mastery of the vampire archetype is really important if you're getting into the darker aspects of the occult, because your ability to feed on evolutionary potential is what is going to define how you are able to cultivate reality after you've been through your initiatory process. So what you're dissolving through dark matter initiation is predefined identity construct. In other words, you're going through a type of vampiric metamorphosis anyway by dying to your old self time and time again. But what is required as you're going through that process is the patience and openness, but also the genuine desire for your own evolution, which is already completely against why most people go into it. Most people go into it for power, aesthetics, and the idea of doing enough. Even if they think that they're doing it to evolve, most people do not. So this is why so many fall into nihilism, because they've been through a type of death-induced alchemy by dying to their old self and dying to their old personas time and time again. That is completely valid. But then what is actually on the other side of that? What's on the other side of what you're dissolving? And this is where conscious vampirism comes in, because you learn how to actually desire evolution and how to actually feed off of evolution instead of feeding off of suppression. This is what vampiric alchemy is really about. This is what the vampire archetype is really about. And this is what the mastery of it is revolved around. The mastery of death by facing it consciously, facing the concept of mortality, understanding what drives you, what makes you hungry, whether that is coming from falsehood. And by default, the ego will be like, no, it's not coming from falsehood. It's coming from the genuine need to evolve. Look deeper. Look deeper, particularly if you feel stuck and nothing is changing. The mastery of desire by understanding what drives you. What comes through this is a level of containment and the ability to sit with your desires without acting on them. Whether it's sexual, whether it's material, whatever that may be, you are able to sit with those desires and embody them in a balanced way. What this does is that you then learn how to feed off of the world around you by actually approaching life in a way that is like, how can I evolve more? How can I grow more as a person? How can I develop my sense of self? What comes with this genuine embodiment is a very particular type of manifestation power, because you've basically unplugged the energy from falsehood. And in doing so, by going through that dissolution process, your desire to have material things or spirituality related things is very much focused around the concept of truth and evolution. You realize that evolution is the currency. So when you're focusing on evolution, you are actually going to gain more material success as a result of it. It's the whole high magic, low magic sort of thing. If you're mastering your own desires, you're learning what they are, you're learning what drives you, and you're learning to rupture your identity that was built from lack and actually replug the energy and distribute energy into things that are going to fuel your evolution, the material success will also follow. So what comes with this is a particular aspect of mastery of the concept of manifestation, not creating through control or lack, bearing in mind that doesn't work anyway, it's just the illusion of the new age. Manifestation, most of what you hear about manifestation is absolute bollocks. What creates your reality is your unconscious material, and as a vampire, you are genuinely building a relationship with your unconscious material and actually merging with it, so then you are not driven by the things that you used to be driven by. You won't be driven as much by material success. You won't be driven as much by the outer layer of spiritual evolution. You are going to be driven by what is actually going to feed my soul, what is actually going to meet my needs, and what is actually going to sustainably feed me. You're building a relationship with your own void, your own internal void. This is why, as I said, the vampire archetype is linked to Darthic alchemy and crossing the abyss, because you're actually entering the void to build a relationship with it and consciously work with it. So this means that when you're building a relationship with your void, you're building a relationship with the innocent hunger of humanity. But instead of bypassing that hunger, you are actually learning to redistribute the hunger into genuine evolution, whereas the majority of humanity is stuck within that illusion of chasing things because they don't feel enough without it. That is the path of the vampire. The path of the vampire is unplugging energy from falsehood, scarcity, and lack, and all the things that hold up your predefined identity, and learning how to distribute that energy into what is actually nurturing your soul. Now, it's dangerous for some people because they don't know how to feed. Because if they don't know how to feed, then how are they going to sustain themselves after their identity is gone? You can go through the Qliphoth if you want to. You can go through the Sephiroth if you want to. You can go through as much dark matter alchemy as you want. But if you can't sustain yourself and you don't know how to sustain your own passion and meet your own needs, what is life going to be after that? It's just going to be hollow. What comes with dissolution and the death of the old self, everything that is not meeting your needs appears hollow. People, dynamics, work, things that are depriving your needs that used to fuel your falsehood, they're going to feel extremely hollow. Things that are not aligned to your passion are going to feel extremely hollow. So in other words, vampiric alchemy is about embodying a reality that is driven by passion. And anything that falls short of that passion is hollow and feels completely meaningless. So if you don't know how to follow your passion and you don't know how to meet your own needs, then you're going to be pretty screwed once you've ruptured that predefined identity, because what is going to be left for you after that? You're not going to be able to comprehend it. You're not going to be able to actually reconstruct a sense of self in a way that's helpful. Instead, you're going to fall into fragmentation like most practitioners do. So real vampirism is extremely important, and I don't mean siphoning energy from other people being important, but the mastery of the archetype simply means learning how to meet your needs, learning how to sustain yourself, how to sustain your soul within a physical reality, and that is challenging. That's a challenging path, and it is a point of no return, because if you don't know how to feed, you're not going to know how to function in reality properly after without falling backwards into coping mechanisms. The Ascended Vampires, then, also referred to as the Strigoi Morte, or the Undead Gods. My channel name for them is the Noctis Exaltate. These spirits are very interesting, and may I also add, very approachable. Okay, so these are spirits that are known in many different ways according to different mythology. How I experience them is spirits that used to actually be human beings. So spirits that used to actually be human, and spirits that used to be human are always much more approachable and understanding of humanity. Okay, that's the external perception of them anyway. They used to be human beings, so they are very accommodating to those who are actually seeking their assistance, and they will almost always show up when you summon them. On the psychological level, they represent the aspects of you that have transcended mortality by facing mortality, mastered death by facing death, and mastered consumption, desire, hunger, and containment. So therefore, they can show you how to master it. And they can teach you also a lot about energetic hygiene. When you interact with the Ascended Vampires, you will get the sensation of a collective showing up, okay? Sometimes one spirit may come through, but normally the whole, like a collective of beings will come through and will kind of merge with your field. They have a naturally dark energy. It does feel like you're interacting with a type of undead god. What is actually happening is that they are, how I perceive it anyway, is that they are siphoning your energy in terms of the energy that you don't need, and then they're replacing it with theirs. In other words, they are showing you how to sustain yourself. So they can be very powerful spirits and archetypes to work with to teach you how to master vampirism from the perspective of mastering the qualities of them. They can also show you how to siphon energy from the world around you in a way that's sustainable. They could teach you and show you how to drain other people from the perspective of draining their falsehood. But again, like I mentioned, I personally don't see the point in that. I would approach these as paradoxical teachers to show you how to master all of the qualities that we have spoken about. And it's particularly important if you are on a path of occult initiation to actually become familiar with the concept of vampirism and the mastery of the archetype so that you can learn how to sustain yourself. So at the moment, myself in my process, I am in the void that is beyond the Qliphothic tree and the Sephiroth. So I'm in a state of a lot of dissolution within myself. So at times like this, there is one hand of surrendering to the dissolution and the meaninglessness, but then there is also learning how to cultivate from within that space. And it's all focused around the meeting of one's needs. How can I meet my needs? So the vampires can show you, the ascended vampires can teach you and initiate you into deeper levels of mastery over your own needs and learning how to meet them in day-to-day life. They can also teach you a lot about boundaries and how to maintain your energy in a way that is optimally effective and sustainable for you going forward. A very powerful practice that you can do is to actively ask them, okay? And I have got rituals of this coming through on Patreon, but actively asking them to drain you, to drain your excess energy, which all of us are going to have to some extent, to drain your excess energy and then consciously ask them to replace it with theirs. This is a very powerful operation that results in a deeper understanding in the way that the vampire archetype and essence functions. Some would say that these spirits require you to practice conscious vampirism and siphoning other people's vitality. I respectfully disagree with that. How I work with these spirits is ultimately mastering these different qualities within self. So when you're working with these spirits, it's unusual that they will have an immensely dissolving effect on you like a demonic spirit. How these spirits will likely work with you is that you'll probably feel quite grounded after. This is how it works because the energy exchange that happens is extremely satisfying. So it can help you to find your feet within a space of dissolution, and it can help you to cultivate reality within a space of dissolution, preventing consistently fragmenting or nihilistic states. Now, there is something to be said for the importance of nihilism, of course. There is something to be said for that. And nihilism does hold medicine, okay? When you're in the depths of initiation, in void-based energy, it's important to embrace the dissolution as much as possible. But there does come a point whereby you have to reconstruct something from the ashes of what you have dissolved. And the whole point of these self-deifying practices is to actually do it yourself, to actually reconstruct a reality that actually meets your needs. And the ascended vampires can show you how to do that in a way that actually works with you. So they are very powerful, very approachable spirits and can help you to master vampirism in a way that is not falling into the trap of vampirism in terms of siphoning other people's energy or operating from power struggle, but in terms of actually mastering hunger and learning how to actually feed off of things that are actually holding your evolutionary potential. This is what vampirism is all about, free from the theatrics and aesthetics that are hovering around the left-hand path communities, and the illusions that the light workers also project onto it as well. Avoid the vampire. I'll get rid of the vampire. No, master the vampire. It's an archetype, it is an energy, it is an aspect of you, whether you like it or not. You are fueling something using the energy that you are either consciously or unconsciously taking from the world around you. So you might as well redistribute that energy into maintaining something that is actually fluid and supports your evolutionary potential instead of siphoning vitality, siphoning validation in order to hold on to your narcissistic bubble. It's one or the other. What type of vampire are you going to be? Are you going to continue to be an unconscious vampire, or are you genuinely going to master the qualities that vampires represent, integrate the vampire within you, and learn how to effectively meet your needs and sustain your ongoing evolution? Essential topic to understand, but I think that is just about everything. I also want to take a moment to just promote my upcoming grimoire that is coming up on Patreon this month, and that is Rites of the Ascended Vampires, a Nocturnal Initiatory Codex. This contains a series of 12 alchemical rites, 11 core initiatory rites with a final alchemical exchange with the Ascended Vampires to take you into deeper levels of mastery over this archetype. Very, very powerful, quite advanced. Check that out on Patreon. It will be out within the next few weeks. So thank you guys. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out Patreon, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.